Good morning again. We're back in. I need to come up with some funny name for my corner here, but just enjoying this morning the opportunity to read and while the family and the children are asleep and to study. I wanted to pick up where we left off last time. If you remember last time in Genesis chapter 31, Jacob and his wife and his children and all that he had acquired from Laban over the past 4 years, an angel appears to Jacob, tells him to leave, and so they sneak away for fear of his father-in-law. And at the end, they come to terms, and Laban leaves, and Jacob continues on his journey back to his home, back in the land of Canaan. So we'll start in chapter 32, verse 1. And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. Right off the bat, we get something interesting. So Jacob, they went their separate ways, Jacob and Laban, and we don't know how many angels, but it just says that the angels, plural, met him. Verse 2, and when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's host." And he called the name of the place Mahanaim. Now, there was a host of angels. So, obviously, it sounds to me, this is God's host. Usually when we think of a host of angels, we think of a numerous amount of whatever, a host of army or a host of... But, so obviously there's more than one angel here. And the word that he calls, that he says, Mahanaim, that is, translates to, it just means two camps. So the question is, is that two camps of angels? Is that his camp and the angels' camp? Don't know. It's kind of interesting though. Verse 3. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. It's interesting that the word Seir, we've heard that before, the land Seir, means hairy. And Esau also means hairy. So, I don't know if there's any correlation there. I don't think so. Maybe. It's, and so often that we got to understand that the time frame that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob takes place is somewhere... it's approximately 400 or 500 years after the flood. We're thinking it's approximately 2,000 years after the creation. But it's also 1,000 years before, well, it was probably about 500 years before Israel leaves Egypt. We don't know when Genesis was written in the way that we have it now. The record as we have it now, we don't know when that was put together, because oftentimes we read and it mentions a city after the name that it was known for in Abraham's time, and sometimes they mention the same location as it's been renamed in the days of whenever it had been written. And we'll see that often where it says, and to this day it is this. So it's saying it was then and to this day, which is whenever this was actually written, Genesis, which nobody really knows. I mean, we know that Moses wrote the book of Genesis, but who put it in the form that we have it now? That's a hot topic, because if Moses wrote it, and this, I'm getting a little far ahead of myself, and this is getting to be a little bit of a tangent, but the books of Moses talks about Moses' death. So if Moses wrote them, how would Moses write about his own death? That there was, I would imagine there was some, Moses wrote the book of Genesis and the 5 books, the Pentateuch. He wrote them, but then somebody probably picked him up and as time went on after Moses' death, filled in and let you know the conclusion or the concluding story of what happened to Moses. Because if Moses only wrote it, and that's all we had, we'd wonder, okay, well, what happened to Moses? Well, we know what happened to Moses because somebody let us know. Somebody filled in the blank. Now, I don't know why I was thinking about that. Oh, yes, because the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Now, whether the Edom, we know, comes from Esau. And Edom means red, and we know Esau was a red man. He was, so, how long after Esau sold his birthright for a mess of pottage to Jacob, that land started to become called Edom after Esau? We don't know. But we know that at the time of Moses, they were very aware. They knew who Edom was. So, we're just going to... I needed... The Genesis just interties and intertwines with so much of the rest of the Bible that it's easy to get off on tangents. It's easy to follow the bread trails and say and explain how it ties into this and ties into that. So I'm going to try to stay focused and stay on the story at hand. Verse 3, and Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Verse 4, and he commanded them, saying, Thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban, and stayed there until now. And I have oxen and asses, flocks and manservants and women servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find grace in thy sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels, into 2 bands. So, back to the 2 camps thing. He just divided everything he had into 2 bands. So when we mentioned back in verse 2, he could have been talking about the 2 hosts or the 2 camps being the 2 camps that he divided them in. That's probably the more likely of all the explanations. But we hear that, so Jacob leaves Laban, fearing for his life and fearing for his property and his wives. And he gets that settled. And then immediately again, as he's journeying towards his home country, he has to deal with Esau. Because if you remember, when he left his family's country, left Canaan, Esau wanted to kill him. Esau hated Jacob. Esau was to the point of not only hating him, but was devising and thinking up ways to kill him. He was comforting himself with the thought of killing Jacob. That's how angry and upset Esau was when Jacob left. So Jacob doesn't know what to expect. And he sends these servants off to just let Esau know that Jacob's coming. And in the most humble of ways, saying that Jacob essentially subjecting himself, saying, Thus shall you speak to the Lord, to my Lord Esau, placing Esau above himself. Thy servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. And I have oxen and asses and flocks and manservants and women servants, and I have sent to my Lord that I may find grace in thy sight. So he's sending emissaries to Esau to let Esau know, and I'm sure also to get a feel for Esau's temperament, whether Esau's still angry and mad or if Esau is forgiven him. And so the servants return and they bring disconcerting news, because they say, verse 6, and the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we come to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. So Esau's bringing 400 men with him. That can be scary. We don't know. We don't know that at that time if Esau was mad and he was bringing 400 men for battle, or if he was bringing the 400 men with forgiveness, bringing the 400 men to help Jacob out, to help bring Jacob and his flocks and his manservants and maidservants, to give them assistance in coming back into the land. It's a good question. But I'm sure it was very disconcerting to Esau, because the servants didn't say one way or the other. They didn't say, yeah, he's bringing a party of men to help you, strong, able men to help you, or he's bringing men for war. They just knew that he was bringing 400 men with him. Verse 8, and said, if Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left will escape. So that we understand why Jacob split his party, or his group, into two camps and separated them, because if Esau attacks one, then at least the other one will have an opportunity to escape and run away. Verse 9. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord Yahweh, which saidst unto me, return unto the country and to thy kindred, and I will deal with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over the Jordan, and now I am become two bands. So we see that Jacob doesn't have much choice. He's scared. He's to the point where he's praying to God and he's pleading with God. He's saying, okay, here Esau's coming with 400 men. He's speaking to God. He said, I'm not worthy of anything, of any mercies from you. But you told me to go back to my homeland. You told me to leave Laban and go back to where I came from. Verse 10 again, I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan. When I read that about when he passed over Jordan with his staff, I'm curious as to why they mention that. What is it about his staff that he crossed over the Jordan? And it brings to mind the two occasions when the Jordan River was stopped. We read about Joshua when the host of Israel entered the promised land, that Joshua, well, it wasn't Joshua, it was actually all the priests that were carrying the Ark of the Covenant. As they walked into the waters of the Jordan River, the water moved away from them, or it was stopped, in that the hosts of Israel, picture this, and we're going to read about this later, but Joshua leads the priests of Israel, holding the Ark of the Covenant into the waters, and the waters stop and allow them to walk onto dry ground. And so the priests of Israel, they go down into the middle of the river, and they stand there while all the hosts of Israel are able to pass across the river on dry ground. And then a second time, when Elisha, which comes quite a bit later, he takes his coat and he smacks the water, and the water stops, and he's able to cross on dry ground. Now, it doesn't say here that sort of thing happened with Jacob, but I just find it interesting that it said, it points out specifically in verse 10 at the very end, "For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become 2 bands." I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. It doesn't say. We don't know. But it's interesting that they specifically say, "With my staff I crossed the Jordan River." And now I become 2 bands. Verse 11. "Deliver me, I pray." And again, one more thing. It seems to me that might have been the case, because here Jacob is recounting that he has done everything that God has told him to do. And he's saying, notwithstanding, he's not worthy of any of these mercies that God has shown him these past 20 years. But he's pleading with God and saying, "I know you told me to do this, and I know you've shown me miracles and wonders." But he's pleading, verse 11, "Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, lest he will come and smite me, and the mother with the children." "And thou saidest, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for the multitude." Verse 13, "And he lodged there the same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother, 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milk camels." Now that M-I-L-C-H, that's not milk, M-I-L-K-E, M-I-L-K. But these were camels for milking. That's what that word milk, M-I-L-C-H, means, is they were milking camels with their colts. Now, if anybody that understands dairy farming, now in our modern age, we can inject hormones that cause cows and even people to lactate, women to lactate. But in those days, they didn't have those chemicals that they could just, or those hormones that they could just inject or take orally or whatever. So in order to keep a cow or a camel producing milk, they had to keep a young one around. They had to constantly have young camels, or young camels, cows, whatever it is, nursing in order to produce milk. And it's just like with us humans. A woman will nurse until the baby stops, until the baby's weaned. The woman doesn't stop nursing until the baby stops. It's not that a woman stops and therefore the baby stops. It's no, the baby stops, therefore the woman stops. And the same for animals. So it's just interesting that they are, and it's not common here in the West, but I'm sure it's common in the Middle East to drink camel's milk. And actually, when I went and Googled camel's milk, so I'm like, camel milk? You can actually buy and order camel milk on the internet, or you can find people that sell camel milk. So it's just interesting to note that these were milking camels, not just working camels. 40 kine, back to verse 15, I'll start over in verse 15. 30 male camels with their colts, 40 kine and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 foals. Now, kine is an older word for cattle, cows. Verse 16, and he delivered them into the land of his servants, into the hand of his servants, every drove by themselves, and said unto the servants, pass over before me, and put a space betwixt drove and drove. So he's saying, okay, I want you to take each group of animals, and I want you to give yourself space, I don't know, probably a quarter mile or a mile in difference, between you as you go into the land. And I'm going to send you in phases or in processions, individual processions, to meet Esau. 17. And he commanded the foremost, saying, when Esau my brother meet thee, and ask thee, saying, whose art thou, and whither goest thou, and whose are these before thee? Then thou shalt say, they be the servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau, and behold, also he is behind us. And so commanded the second and the third and all the following droves, saying, on this manner shall ye speak unto Esau, which ye find him. And say ye moreover, behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with presents that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face, peradventure he will accept me. So no bones about it. Jacob is sending all of these gifts ahead of time with his servants to say to Esau, Jacob's sorry. He wants nothing more for there to be peace between the two, and that he is willing to give up all that he has. Now, are all these animals all that he had? Probably not, because there's two camps. We learned that Jacob divided the two. And so he's sending one camp forward, and if that camp is attacked, then the second camp that's behind can hightail it out of here. Was this all that Jacob owned? I don't know. I would imagine it was a considerable amount. Because we got to remember that Jacob, for the last 20 years, he only had 4 years to acquire any kind of wealth or acquire any kind of livestock. Because for the first 14 years, everything that he did went to Laban in wages for his wives, for Rachel and Leah. So this may seem like a lot of animals, but in 4 years' time, I'm sure the amount that he was sending to Esau at least had to have been half of what he had. And it was far more than just a royal gift. You know, when you have two people, for example, when Abraham's servant was sent to his homeland to find a wife for Isaac, he sent 10 camels bearing gifts and gold and whatnot. I think what Jacob was offering Esau was at least that or more. So Esau is doing everything he can to show, I'm sorry, getting their names mixed up. Jacob is doing everything he can to show Esau that he is indeed sorry and he's willing to submit to Esau at any price. Verse 21, so went the present over before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. 22, and he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons, and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook, and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. So Jacob has sent everybody ahead of him, everything ahead of him, across the river, and he is left by himself, the last person to make that trek into Esau's land, or into the land of Edom. And here's where something gets very interesting. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the break of the day. So he sent his wives and his concubines ahead of him, and it was nighttime. And once they left, he was by himself. And we don't know what time of the night it was, but it was obviously nighttime. And he wrestled the man all night until the sun began to come up, until the break of day. Verse 25, and when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. So the man, Jacob, is obviously preventing this man from going, holding on to him. And the man, well, it says man, and the Hebrew actually says man as well. It doesn't say angel or anything. But he's holding this man and won't let him go. And this man that Jacob is wrestling is not prevailing or getting the upper hand. And so he does something to that. It says that he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, and he wrestled with him. The hollow of your thigh, or the hollow of your thigh, is that portion of your thigh right up next to your groin. If you ever see bodybuilders or professional athletes that are wearing for lack of better words, I'm sorry for this, bikini underwear, right where the leg attaches to the trunk of your body, that's the hollow of your thigh. And you'll notice there's an indentation there. Like I said, you especially see it in bodybuilders and in athletes. So apparently, whoever Jacob was wrestling with touched that area and caused it to go out of joint. And this becomes significant later. And he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. So Jacob is wanting this person, this individual, to bless him. And is not willing to let go, even with a dislocated thigh or joint, is not willing to let this individual go until he blesses him. Verse 27, and he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, which translated means God prevails. Now anytime you see a name or a word in the Bible that ends with El, we have Bethel. That's the house of God. Israel, God. El, God. God prevails. Emmanuel. El is God. El is short for Elohim, which we know in the beginning in Genesis, Elohim is God. So Israel is God prevails. It's interesting that at some point Abram was his name was changed to Abraham. Isaac's name never was changed, but Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And that's where this is the point where we learn, or where we get the word Israel and where the Israelites come from. Because from this point, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are recognized as Hebrews. And in fact, we'll read further further down the line that when Jacob goes into Egypt, Pharaoh calls him a Hebrew. So where were we? Verse 28, and he said, thy name shall call no more Jacob, which we know means supplanter, but Israel. God prevails. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. So Jacob obviously he prevailed against God in a physical wrestling match. Or at least didn't let him go. But it's interesting that, Jacob meant supplanter because he had a hold of Esau's heel as they were born. Well, now again, he is demanding that this individual bless him and won't let him go. Verse 29. And Jacob asked him and said, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore is it thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. So, something kind of interesting. So, this individual asked Jacob what his name is. And Jacob says, Jacob. And the individual says, no more will your name be Jacob, it will be Israel. And Jacob's response was, well, what's your name? And the individual says, why are you asking me what my name is? And then blessed him. So it's almost like, did he not answer, or was it not written what he answered? Because it never reveals what this person's name is. A lot of people assume, and we can assume who it is. Most people assume it was Yahweh, it was Jehovah, it was God. But it's never mentioned his name. Jacob says, what's your name? And the individual says, why do you ask me my name? And then blessed him. So, I don't know. Verse 30, and Jacob called the name of the place Penuel. There's El again. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So this is why most assume that the individual that Jacob is wrestling with is God himself. Because he says, I've seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And he passed over Penuel. The sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. This will be... So, what it means is he's limping. As he passes from there, and he's heading towards Esau, he's limping. We don't know that what Esau's intentions were when we talked about this, when he left to meet Jacob. Maybe he brought these 400 men anticipating a fight. Maybe he brought these 400 men anticipating Jacob flaunting wealth in front of him and usurping himself over him. But what Esau finds is procession after procession of animals and gifts and servants preceding him, and then he sees Jacob, and Jacob is limping and is obviously not physically whole. Jacob's not walking like a man, a man of strength, but he's limping because of his thigh, and Esau may have found mercy and felt pity more than anything, or felt sorry for Jacob. And maybe Esau realized that Jacob hasn't had it that easy. When Jacob went to the land of his fathers to find a wife, it's not like the stories of when Isaac went and came right back and had wealth. No, Jacob comes back a broken man. Verse 32, therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew that which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh unto this day. So here again, when I was talking at the very beginning, it says unto this day. So apparently there was a tradition at one time within Israel that they would not eat the inner thigh of an animal in remembrance of what happened with Jacob, when he wrestled. Unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank. Now, up until this point, all we know is that the individual Jacob was wrestling with touched the hollow of his thigh and threw it out of joint. But according to this, verse 32, touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank. So it wasn't just throwing his leg out of joint. Apparently, when this individual touched the inside of his thigh, it caused a major muscle to shrink, to become paralyzed, if you will, or inoperative. So Jacob, it doesn't specifically say, but it could be assumed that Jacob lived the rest of his life with a limp. That that from that time forward, he had difficulty moving and traveling. That he had a noticeable limp and deformity about his leg. 33. You know what? I think we'll pause there, because verse 33 is bittersweet and wonderful, and we'll just leave it at that. We'll leave it at a cliffhanger, because Jacob's about to meet his brother Esau, and we're going to see something wonderful happen. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful day. I am very much enjoying going through the Old Testament again, going through the book of Genesis, and just absorbing what's going on, because I say this over and over like a broken record. There's so much there that's implied but not explicit. There's so much there that leaves you wondering, okay, well, why? What was going on? Like the staff, the individual's name that Jacob was wrestling with. Why, if it was God, Yahweh himself, why didn't he say Yahweh? He just said, why are you asking me my name? So the Genesis is an amazing, beautiful book. I love it. Go read your Bible. See you later.